Nora had always believed the legends about the unbreakable alpha bond until the illusion shattered. Listening from the shadows, she heard her husband, the most powerful man in the Pacific Northwest, coldly and clinically plotting her replacement. The man she thought loved her was planning her end. Now with Dawn only hours away, she had to vanish entirely or she would never make it out of Thornridge territory alive. No one ever tells Aluna how suffocating it is to live inside a fairy tale, especially when the castle is heavily guarded and the prince has fangs. For 5 years, Nora Hastings was the Luna of the Thornridge Pack. To the human residents of Port Angeles, Washington, they were simply the Blackwood family reclusive billionaires who owned half the timber industry on the Olympic Peninsula. Her husband, Declan Blackwood, was the alpha. To the world, he was a charismatic CEO with a ruthless streak. To their pack, he was law. To Nora, he was the center of gravity. Or so she believed. Their life at the Blackwood estate was a masterclass in quiet luxury. A sprawling stone mansion overlooking the Strait of Juan de Fuca, a fleet of black SUVs, and an army of loyal staff. But beneath the imported Italian marble and the designer gowns Declan bought for her, a quiet rot had been spreading through their marriage. The primary duty of an alpha and a Luna isn't to govern, it's to provide an heir. An alpha's bloodline must continue to keep the pack stable. For 3 years they had tried. Every month brought a new wave of hope, followed by the crushing, silent despair of failure. Declan's warm gaze had slowly hardened into something clinical. His late nights at the office turned into weekend-long business trips to Saddle. He stopped reaching for her in the dark. Nora blamed the stress of the pack. She blamed herself. She never blamed him. The memory of how it began still lived in her bones, warm and golden, like summer light through old windows. 6 years ago, at a fundraiser in downtown Seattle, she'd been a social worker fighting for her nonprofit's survival. Declan had walked into the room and every head had turned. He moved like gravity itself had reorganized around him. He'd approached her booth, asked about her work with foster children, listened with an intensity that made her feel like the only person in a room of 300. When he asked for her number, she hesitated. When he smiled patient and genuine, she relented. Their first date lasted 12 hours. Coffee turned into lunch into a walk along the waterfront, the walk into dinner as the sun set over Elliott Bay. He told her about the weight of legacy, about carrying a name that felt like iron chains sometimes. She told him about her mother, about the journal filled with warnings she'd never fully understood. He kissed her under the Space Needle, and she felt the bond snap into place like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. The bonding ceremony happened 3 months later under a full moon at Olympic National Park. Pack members she'd never met bowed to her. Declan's eyes had been so full of promise that night, his hands steady on the small of her back as he introduced her to elders and allies. She wore a dress the color of fresh snow, and when he marked her under the ancient pines, she believed she'd found her forever. The first year was everything the fairy tales promised. Declan taught her pack protocols with patience, laughing when she stumbled over the formal greetings. He surprised her with weekend trips to the San Juan Islands, walks on windswept beaches where they could shift and run without human eyes watching. He built her a library in the East Wing, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water, and filled it with first editions of every book she'd ever mentioned loving. The second year brought the first whispers. Elder Rowan, a silver-haired traditionalist with eyes like riverstones, began asking pointed questions. When would they hear the patter of pup feet? Declan would laugh it off, pull Nora close, tell them these things took time. But she noticed the tightness around his mouth after those conversations, the way his hand would drop from her waist just a fraction sooner than before. The third year turned trying into a medical mission. Specialists in Seattle, then Portland, then a renowned fertility clinic in San Francisco. Needles and invasive procedures and calendars marked with optimum conception windows. 18 attempts, 18 failures. The doctor's sympathetic smiles began to feel like funerals. Declan stopped coming to appointments after the 12th try, said he trusted her to handle it, that his presence wasn't necessary for the clinical aspects. She didn't argue. She was too tired from the hormone treatments, too hollowed out from hope deferred month after month. The fourth year brought distance. Declan's business trips lengthened. His home office door stayed closed later into the night. The elders no longer asked about children. They simply looked at her with a mixture of pity and disdain that made her skin crawl. Elder Rowan in particular seemed to take pleasure in her failure, his formal greetings growing colder, his eyes sliding past her as though she were already a ghost. The fifth year brought Sable Wren. She arrived in late April with the apple blossoms introduced as a trade liaison from the Blackwood Pack's southern neighbors. She was younger than Nora by 2 years, with dark hair that fell in perfect waves and a laugh like wind chimes. Declan asked Nora to make their guest feel welcome. So Nora did. She invited Sable to dinner, showed her the hiking trails through the estate's private forest, lent her a favorite scarf when an unexpected rain shower caught them in town. Sable seemed grateful, even sisterly. She asked Nora about her work, about her life, before Declan listened with what seemed like genuine interest. Looking back, Nora couldn't pinpoint the exact moment she should have known. Maybe it was the way Sable's hand lingered on Declan's arm during conversations. Maybe it was how he laughed at her jokes, the sound unguarded in a way he hadn't been with Nora in years. Maybe it was nothing she could have seen because she was too busy trying to be good, to be useful, to be enough. But there had been one moment sharp and bright as broken glass. 2 months ago, Nora had returned early from a trip to Seattle, a charity board meeting that had been mercifully brief. She'd walked into the west drawing room and found them by the fireplace. Not touching nothing she could name as improper, but the air between them hummed with something that made her wolf whimper and curl small inside her chest. They'd looked up, startled. Declan's expression had smoothed into neutral welcome so quickly she almost doubted what she'd seen. Sable had smiled warm and guileless, asked how the meeting went. Nora had smiled back, made small talk, excused herself. Later that night, alone in the master bedroom, while Declan worked late again, she'd told herself she was imagining things, projecting her insecurities onto innocent interactions. She'd found the pregnancy test 3 weeks ago. Positive. Hidden poorly in the guest bathroom trash, wrapped in tissue, but visible if you looked. Her heart had stopped. For one wild, impossible moment, she'd thought maybe it was a sign, maybe the universe was telling her it could happen, that she wasn't broken after all. Then Sable had found her standing there, frozen, staring at the test. The younger woman's face had crumpled with what looked like genuine distress. She'd explained through tears that she'd been seeing someone back home, that he'd left her when he found out that she'd come to Thornridge territory to escape the scandal. She begged Nora not to tell Declan, not yet said she was ashamed and afraid and didn't know what to do. Nora had held her while she cried, made tea, told her everything would be okay, promised to keep her secret. Because that's what Nora did. She helped. She understood. She made space for other people's pain while her own carved deeper trenches inside her chest. 2 years earlier, something had shifted in Nora's gut. A whisper of warning she couldn't name, couldn't explain to anyone, least of all herself. It happened the day she overheard Elder Rowan speaking to Declan in the hallway outside the library. 3 years is traditional, the elder had said, his voice carrying that particular satisfaction of quoting ancient law. 3 years without an heir gives grounds for severance. You know this, Declan. The pack knows this. Declan had murmured something noncommittal, but Nora had stood on the other side of the heavy oak door, one hand pressed to her stomach, the other clutching a book she'd been about to reshelf. The bond between them had felt cold in that moment, like touching metal in winter. She didn't confront him, didn't ask. Instead, she began preparing. Every Tuesday, she drove into Port Angeles for groceries. Every Tuesday, she stopped at the Walgreens on Highway 101 and purchased a $500 prepaid Visa gift card. Cash only. She told the cashiers it was for her niece's birthday fund, her smile warm and believable. At home, she slipped each card into the hollow lining of her winter coats. Not the designer pieces Declan bought her, but the older coats from before, the ones she'd owned when she was just Nora Hastings' social worker, before she became Nora Blackwood Luna. The dove gray wool peacoat. The black puffer with the torn pocket she'd never bothered to fix. The forest green parka she'd bought at an outlet mall. For 2 years, every Tuesday, another card. She didn't let herself think about why. Didn't examine the instinct too closely, afraid that looking directly at it would make it crumble, or worse, make it real. Her mother had written in her journal about listening to the voice that lives beneath conscious thought, the one that knows things before the mind catches up. Nora listened. By October, she had 20 cards, $10,000 in untraceable funds hidden in plain sight in a walk-in closet full of clothes she rarely wore anymore. It happened on a Tuesday night in mid-October. A vicious coastal storm was battering the estate, rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of their bedroom. Declan had come home late, retreating straight to his ground-floor study with 2 of the pack elders. Around 2 in the morning, Nora woke feeling a sudden, inexplicable chill. The bond, that psychic tether that connects a mated pair, felt frayed. It vibrated with a strange, dark static that raised goosebumps along her arms. She lay still for a moment, listening to the storm howl outside, to the old house settle and creak around its bones. Declan's side of the bed was cold. He hadn't come up at all. Thinking he might be stressed, she slipped out of bed, pulling a heavy cashmere robe over her silk nightgown. The house was enormous and silent except for the wind. Her bare feet whispered against hardwood as she made her way down the grand mahogany staircase, one hand trailing along the banister, the smooth wood cool under her palm. She walked toward the west wing where Declan's private study was located. As she approached the heavy oak doors, she noticed they were left open just a crack, a sliver of amber light spilling into the dim hallway. She raised her hand to push the door open, to announce herself, but a voice stopped her dead in her tracks. It wasn't Declan, it was Elder Rowan, his gravelly voice drifting through the opening like smoke. "The pack is growing restless, Declan. 3 years is too long. The neighboring packs are smelling weakness. A barren Luna is a curse on the soil. We need a strong female to solidify your reign." Nora froze. Barren. The word struck her like a physical blow to the stomach, driving the air from her lungs. Her breath hitched, but she clamped a hand over her mouth, pressing her back against the cold corridor wall. The plaster bit into her spine through the thin robe. She waited for Declan to defend her. Waited for her husband, the man who swore under the light of the full moon to protect her until his last breath, to shut Elder Rowan down. To remind him that these things take time, that they were still trying, that medical science was advancing every day. Instead, she heard the clinking of ice against crystal, Declan taking a sip of his bourbon. When he spoke, his voice was smooth, terrifyingly calm, the tone he used in boardrooms when negotiating deals worth millions. "I know, Rowan. The arrangements have already been made." The floor tilted beneath Nora's feet. Arrangements? Made? Past tense. Decided, done. Nora has served her purpose in maintaining diplomatic ties. Declan continued, each word precise and cold as surgical steel. But her usefulness has expired. We can't afford to appear weak any longer. Tears pricked her eyes hot and fast. Usefulness. Was that all their 5 years? Were by a diplomatic strategy with an expiration date? She bit down on her knuckle to keep from making a sound tasted salt and copper. Then a third voice spoke, a woman's voice, sweet and melodic and devastatingly familiar. "She's going to make a scene, Declan. You know how emotional she gets." It was Sable Wren. The woman Nora had welcomed into her home, fed at her table, comforted when she cried about her pregnancy. Sable, who was supposed to be a guest, a colleague, nothing more. "She won't have the chance to make a scene, Sable." Declan's tone softened in a way it hadn't softened for his wife in years, gentle and almost tender. "The Autumn Equinox Gala is this Friday. The entire regional council will be there along with the national press for the charity auction. During the midnight toast, I will invoke the ancient rite of severance." Nora's knees buckled. She slid down the wall, the cold plaster scraping her back through silk and cashmere until she was crouched on the floor like a child hiding from thunder. "I'll present the pack elders with her medical records." Declan went on, his voice steady and rehearsed like he'd practiced this speech. "Proving her inability to carry a pup. The law allows an alpha to sever a mate who cannot fulfill her biological duty. It will be public, legally binding, and undeniable." And then Sable's voice purred with anticipation. Nora could hear the rustle of fabric, the unmistakable sound of someone settling into a lap of hands, finding familiar places on a body they'd mapped before. "And then," Declan murmured, and Nora could hear the smile in his voice, intimate and warm, "I announce my new Luna, the one who is already carrying my heir." The world stopped. Every sound muted except for the roaring in Nora's ears, the thundering of her heart trying to break free from her ribs. Carrying my heir. Sable. The pregnancy test. The tears. The story about the boyfriend back home. All of it lies. All of it theater. Nora pressed both hands to her mouth, holding back the sob that wanted to tear out of her throat. Her wolf, usually a comforting presence in the back of her mind, whimpered and curled into a tight, agonizing ball of grief. "What about her family?" Elder Rowan asked, practical even in betrayal. "The Hastings have influence in the human courts. Her brother won't take this quietly." "I've already frozen her trust accounts." Declan stated this like he was discussing the weather, casual and matter-of-fact. "Every account she has access to. By the time I reject her on Friday, she won't have a dime to her name. She'll be an outcast. No pack will take in a rejected Baron Luna. She'll have no choice but to sign the non-disclosure agreements and disappear into the human world quietly. It's cleaner this way." They weren't just ending the marriage. They were orchestrating her absolute destruction. Declan was going to humiliate her in front of hundreds of wolves, strip her of her title, her dignity, her financial independence, all to pave the way for his pregnant mistress. He'd been planning this. The frozen accounts, the medical records, the public venue. Every detail calculated for maximum efficiency and minimum resistance. How long had he been planning this? Weeks, months. Had he ever loved her at all, or had she been nothing but a placeholder from the beginning? A diplomatic bridge to her family's old money connections, useful until something better came along. Nora didn't stay to hear the rest. She couldn't. If she stayed one more second, she would scream or shift or break in ways she might not come back from. She pulled herself up on shaking legs, using the wall for support. The agonizing heartbreak that had gripped her chest a moment ago crystallized into something else. Something sharp, cold, and razor-thin. Survival. She moved through the shadows of the mansion, like a ghost instinct, taking over where conscious thought had shattered. The house she'd lived in for 5 years suddenly felt like enemy territory. Every camera, every staff member, every familiar hallway was a potential trap. When she reached the master bedroom, she locked the door and leaned against it, her chest heaving, fighting for air that felt like breathing underwater. The clock on the nightstand read 2:47 in the morning. Dawn came around 6:30 this time of year. She had roughly 4 hours. 4 hours before the estate woke up. 4 hours before Declan came upstairs and resumed his role as the loving, concerned husband, asking her about her plans for the day, kissing her forehead with lips that lied. If she waited until Friday, she would be a sacrificial lamb. Declan controlled the PAC security. He controlled the local Port Angeles police chief through campaign donations and favors. He controlled her bank accounts. If she tried to fight him legally, his lawyers would crush her. If she tried to fight him within the PAC, his alpha aura would force the others into submission. There was only one option. She had to disappear. Nora moved quickly. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She went to her walk-in closet, a space larger than her first apartment had been, and ignored the racks of Chanel and Dior. Those clothes belonged to Nora Blackwood Luna. She needed to become someone else. Someone smaller. Someone who could vanish. She reached up to the highest shelf and pulled down a battered, faded olive green duffel bag from her college days. The canvas was worn soft, one of the straps repaired with duct tape. It smelled like dust and the past. What does a Luna take when she runs for her life? Not the jewelry. Declan had bought everything with his Black American Express. Every diamond was likely insured and traceable. Nora left her 2-carat engagement ring and her platinum wedding band sitting on the center of his pristine mahogany dresser. The visual of it felt like a final silent scream. She packed practical items, heavy denim jeans she'd bought herself 2 years ago and barely worn, thermal shirts, waterproof hiking boots, a thick fleece jacket, wool socks, a knit hat. She grabbed her mother's silver locket from the vanity, the only thing of value that belonged to her before Declan. Inside was a photo so faded she could barely make out her mother's face anymore, but she could feel the weight of it, the history. Money was the biggest problem. As Declan had bragged to his conspirators, her accounts were monitored, probably already frozen. But Declan, for all his controlling nature, had underestimated her prudence. Or maybe he just never thought her capable of foresight. Nora tore through the winter coats, hands shaking, feeling along the linings. The dove gray peacoat yielded 4 cards. The black puffer 5. The green parka 6 more. She found the rest scattered through other coats, forgotten jackets, a blazer she'd worn to one charity event, and never again. She counted them on the bed, her hands steadier now with each card she added to the pile. 20 cards. $10,000 in untraceable funds. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to disappear. Enough to survive while she figured out what came next. Her iPhone sat on the nightstand, sleek and silver, and essentially a tracking device with a pretty interface. Declan had bought it for her, set up the account, probably had access to everything. Location services, cloud backups. Find my iPhone. She powered it down, wiped it clean with a microfiber cloth, and placed it next to her wedding rings on Declan's dresser. From the bottom of her underwear drawer, she pulled out a cheap, prepaid flip phone. She'd bought it 6 months ago at a truck stop outside Sequim. Payne kept telling the bored teenager behind the counter she needed a backup for emergencies. The battery was still charged. She'd been meticulous about that, plugging it in once a month, some part of her knowing even then that this day might come. Nora sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress that had become a battleground of silent disappointment, and dialed a number she'd memorized but hadn't called in 4 years. It rang 5 times. She almost hung up, almost decided this was insane, that she should just wait, should try to fight legally, should tell herself the fairy tale could still be saved. Then a groggy voice answered, rough with sleep and confusion. "Hello." "Wyatt," she whispered, her voice trembling for the first time since she'd left the hallway outside Declan's study. "It's Nora." There was a long pause on the other end. She could picture her older brother sitting up in whatever modest apartment he lived in now, running a hand through hair that was probably standing on end, trying to make sense of his sister's voice after years of enforced silence. Wyatt had renounced the wolf lifestyle a decade ago, choosing to live entirely as a human in Portland, Oregon. He owned a small, cash-only auto repair shop, refused to attend pack gatherings, wanted nothing to do with the politics and hierarchies. Declan had forbidden Nora from speaking to him, called him a disgrace to their kind, said his presence would undermine her position as Luna. She'd obeyed, because that's what she did. She obeyed. Nora, Wyatt's voice sharp in sleep vanishing. Jesus, do you know what time it is? Is everything okay? No. The word came out choked. She fought back a sob, bit down hard on her lip until she tasted copper again. Wyatt, I need help. I'm leaving Declan tonight. If he catches me, I don't know what he'll do, but I know I won't survive it. The sleep instantly vanished from Wyatt's voice, replaced by the focused calm of someone who'd spent years working with his hands, solving problems, fixing things that were broken. Where are you? Still at the estate. I'm making a run for it before sunrise. Don't take any vehicle he bought you. Wyatt spoke quickly, now his mind clearly racing through logistics. They all have LoJack and GPS trackers installed. Does he still have that old hunting cabin near Forks? Yes. Hope fluttered in her chest, fragile as paper wings. I have a buddy who leaves a 1998 Chevy Tahoe out there for off-roading. Beat to hell, but it runs. The keys are hidden under the driver's side floor mat. It's old enough that it doesn't have any computers in it for Declan to track. Nora calculated the distance in her head. The cabin was a good 5 miles through dense mountainous forest. For a human, it would take hours of dangerous night hiking. For a wolf, it was a hard sprint, maybe 40 minutes if she pushed. I can make it, she said and meant it. Get to the Tahoe. Drive south down the logging roads. Stay off Highway 101 as long as you can. I'll meet you at the old diner outside Astoria in 4 hours. Can you do that? Yes. Nora. Wyatt's voice softened, and she heard the fear underneath the competence. Just get out of there. Don't look back. Don't second guess. Run. Thank you, Wyatt. Don't thank me until you're safe. She hung up. The clock read 3:13. She slung the duffel bag over her shoulder, testing the weight. It was heavy but manageable. She looked around the bedroom one last time. The silk sheets, the walk-in closet, the ensuite bathroom with the soaking tub and heated floors. All of it beautiful. All of it a cage. On Declan's dresser, she pulled out a piece of his personal stationery and wrote in steady block letters, "You wanted me gone. I'm granting your wish." She didn't sign it, didn't need to. The hardest part wasn't leaving the room. It was getting off the property. The Blackwood estate was protected by a state-of-the-art security system, complete with motion sensors and thermal cameras. Worse, they had a rotation of shifter guards patrolling the perimeter. Liam usually took the south lawn at 3:30 in the morning. She knew because insomnia had made her familiar with the rhythms of the house, the patterns of protection that were meant to keep dangers out but would now keep her in. Nora slipped out the servants' entrance near the kitchens, a route she'd taken countless times to avoid waking Declan when she couldn't sleep. The rain was still pouring, a cold, relentless deluge that soaked through her jacket in seconds. It was actually a blessing. Rain would wash away her scent, blur the thermal cameras. She crept along the edge of the rose garden, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird trying to break free. She knew the patrol routes. Liam was punctual to a fault. She crouched behind a marble fountain, the angel weeping stone tears, while real rain poured down around them. The icy water soaked through her jeans, numbing her legs, but she didn't dare move. Right on schedule, a massive timber wolf with gray and black fur trotted past his head, low against the rain. Liam, if he caught he or scent, if he saw her, he would alert the alpha immediately. Pack law, pack loyalty. She held her breath, burying her face into her wet jacket to mask her smell, making herself as small as possible behind the fountain's base. Liam paused. His ears swiveled, catching some sounds she couldn't hear over the storm. Nora's blood turned to ice in her veins. Please, she prayed to the moon goddess, to her mother's memory, to anything that might be listening. Please don't look. A branch snapped in the distance, probably a deer spooked by the storm, and Liam bounded off toward the noise, his massive form disappearing into the darkness between the trees. Nora didn't wait. She bolted for the tree line, her boots slipping on wet grass, the duffel bag bouncing against her back. The moment the shadows of the ancient pine trees swallowed her, she dropped the bag and let the shift overtake her. The pain of bones breaking and reforming was a familiar comfort, a hurt she understood. Within seconds, she stood on four paws, pure white fur, blending with the rain-soaked darkness. She grabbed the strap of the duffel bag, in her jaws, the canvas rough against her tongue, and took off into the forest. She ran like she had never run before. The wet earth tore at her paws' roots, grabbing branches, whipping her face, but she pushed harder. She ran from the humiliation. She ran from the 5 years of lies. She ran from the man who was currently sleeping in a warm bed, probably dreaming of how he would destroy her on Friday in front of everyone who mattered. The Olympic forest was old-growth, massive trees that had stood for centuries, their canopy so thick that even in daylight the forest floor lived in permanent twilight. In the storm, in the dead of night, it was like running through ink. But her wolf eyes saw what human eyes couldn't: the silver outline of deer trails, the darker shadows that meant fallen logs, the glimmer of standing water in low spots. Her lungs burned. Her muscles screamed. The duffel bag grew heavier with each mile, the strap cutting into her jaw, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Behind her, the Blackwood estate lights glowed through the trees like watching eyes. Ahead, somewhere in the darkness, was the cabin, was the Tahoe, was freedom. By the time she reached the old hunting cabin near Forks, the sky was beginning to bleed a bruised purple at the edges. Dawn was coming. She shifted back to human form, shivering violently in the freezing rain, and threw her soaked clothes back on with numb fingers. The cabin was dark, abandoned, exactly as she remembered from one hunting trip years ago, when Declan had still bothered to include her in pack activities. Sure enough, tucked behind the cabin in a clearing was a rusted, beat-up Chevy Tahoe. Moss grew on the wheel wells. One headlight was cracked. It looked like it should belong in a junkyard. Nora yanked the door open, the hinges screaming protest, and felt under the floor mat with shaking hands. Her fingers closed around cold metal. Keys. She shoved them into the ignition, whispering a prayer to every deity she could think of. The engine sputtered, coughed, died. No, 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 no. Not after everything. Not when she was this close. She tried again, pumping the gas pedal the way Wyatt had taught her when she was 16, learning to drive in his first broken-down restoration project. The engine turned over, caught, roared to life with a sound like a small earthquake. Black smoke belched from the exhaust. The whole vehicle shook. But it ran. Nora threw the truck into drive and peeled out onto the muddy logging road, the tires spitting gravel and earth. The steering wheel was cracked leather under her hands. The heater blasted a smell of old dust and burnt oil into the cabin. One wiper blade was missing, leaving a streak of rain across half the windshield. It was the most beautiful vehicle she'd ever driven. She looked in the rearview mirror as she navigated the winding logging road. The sun was just peeking over the Olympic Mountains, illuminating the sprawling territory she used to call home. Somewhere back there, Declan was about to wake up. He would reach for her across cool sheets and find emptiness. He would see the note, the rings. He would understand that his perfect, devastating plan had shattered to pieces. Let him search, let him rage. The barren Luna was gone, and hell would freeze over before she ever let him find her. The drive down toward Highway 101 was a blur of towering evergreens and relentless rain. Nora's knuckles were white on the steering wheel of the rusted Tahoe, the heater blasting its burnt oil smell into the cabin. Every pair of headlights in the rearview mirror made her heart skip a beat, made her foot instinctively press harder on the gas pedal. But as the miles accumulated, as the Olympic Mountains grew smaller behind her, and the road signs started counting down to Astoria, her breathing began to slow. She crossed into Oregon, and something in her chest that had been wound tight for 5 years started to loosen. By the time she saw the Astoria-Megler Bridge stretching across the Columbia River, the sun was fully up, weak and watery through the storm clouds, but undeniably there. She hadn't been followed. Either Declan hadn't discovered her absence yet, or he was moving more carefully than she'd anticipated, trying to keep the situation contained until Friday's gala. The diner Wyatt had mentioned was easy to spot, a chrome-sided relic from the 1950s perched near the docks. The neon sign reading Rosie's blinked red against the gray morning. Nora pulled the Tahoe into the gravel lot, her whole body shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. Wyatt was waiting in a booth by the window, a mug of black coffee in front of him. He looked older than she remembered. His face was lined with the honest exhaustion of a mechanic's life grease, permanently embedded under his fingernails, gray threading through his dark hair. But his eyes were sharp, the same bright hazel she saw in the mirror every morning. When she slid into the vinyl seat across from him, he didn't hug her. He knew she was too fragile right now, liable to shatter completely if someone touched her with kindness. Instead, he pushed a plate of hash browns toward her and slid a manila envelope across the Formica table. "Fake ID," he said quietly, pitching his voice low, even though the diner was nearly empty at this hour. Name is Maya Brennan. Burner phone with prepaid minutes. And keys to a cabin I own off the grid near Sisters, Oregon. Deep in the Deschutes National Forest. Maywas. Nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. No cell service, but there's a landline for emergencies. Nora stared at the envelope, her throat tight. When did you prepare all this? About 2 years ago. Wyatt took a sip of his coffee, his expression grim. Called it my insurance policy. Figured if Declan ever came after me, I'd need a way to disappear fast. Never thought I'd be giving it to you. How did you know I'd need it? I didn't know. I hoped I was wrong. He met her eyes across the table. But I know how these old line packs work. I know what happens to Lunas who can't produce heirs. Our mother's journal wasn't just her story, Nora. It's the story of dozens of women. Hundreds, probably. The mention of their mother made tears prick at Nora's eyes. She blinked them back, focusing instead on the hash browns, forcing herself to eat even though the food tasted like ash. Her body needed fuel. Grief was a luxury for later. Did you hear anything from Port Angeles? She asked. Wyatt offered a grim smile. The shifter forms are losing their minds. Declan woke up to find you gone. Apparently, he tore the west wing of the estate apart, but he's playing it close to the chest. He told the staff you had a family emergency in Seattle. He's trying to keep a lid on it until Friday. Friday, the autumn equinox gala. The night Declan had planned to destroy her in front of the entire regional pack council, the press, everyone who mattered in their world. He probably still thought he could find her before then drag her back, force her to play her part in his theater. He was wrong. Nora finished eating mechanical bites that fueled her body without registering taste. Wyatt watched her with the quiet concern of someone who'd learned not to push, who understood that sometimes the only thing you could do for someone in pain was witness it. When she was done, he pulled out a laptop from his worn canvas messenger bag. There's something else you need to see. I spent last night hacking into Declan's email server. Wyatt, that's illegal. So is falsifying medical records. He opened the laptop, turned it toward her. Which is exactly what your dear husband has been doing. The screen showed an email chain between Declan and someone named Dr. Vincent Chen at a private fertility clinic in Seattle. Nora's hands started shaking as she read. The first email was dated 18 months ago. We can continue providing Mrs. Blackwood with the fertility treatments as cover, but per your request, we will ensure the prescribed hormone regimen is insufficient for successful conception. The monthly reports to your insurance will reflect standard treatment protocols. She scrolled down, found another email, this one with an attachment labeled Blackwood_medical_summary_final. This document contains the medical evidence you requested formatted for legal presentation. As discussed, it emphasizes repeated treatment failures and concludes with a strong recommendation against further conception attempts due to apparent biological incompatibility. He paid them. Nora whispered the words, scraping her throat raw. He paid them to make sure I wouldn't get pregnant. It gets worse. Wyatt clicked to another folder. Prescription records. Bottles of pills with clinical names she didn't recognize, all addressed to her, all signed for by Declan. He's been putting these in your daily vitamins. Low-dose contraceptives. Nothing that would show up in standard blood work, but enough to make sure you never conceived. The diner tilted sideways. Nora gripped the edge of the table, her vision swimming. All those months of hope, all those treatments, all those failures she'd blamed on her broken body. And the whole time Declan had been ensuring she would fail. Sabotaging her, making her believe she was barren so he'd have legal grounds to replace her. I was never infertile, she said, the realization hitting like cold water. He made me think I was broken. He made everyone think you were broken. Wyatt's voice was tight with anger. Classic abuser playbook. Isolate the victim. Make them doubt their own reality. Control the narrative. Nora looked up at her brother, at this man who'd walked away from pack life because he saw its toxicity, who'd been proven right in the worst possible way. Can you copy all of this? Already did. 3 backup drives. 1 for you, 1 for me, 1 in a safety deposit box in Portland. Wyatt closed the laptop. The question is, what do you want to do with it? What did she want to do? The old Nora, the Luna, who smiled at charity events and made small talk with elders and tried so hard to be good, would have said nothing, would have taken the high road, would have disappeared quietly like Declan expected. But that Nora had died somewhere on the logging road outside Forks. The woman sitting in this diner wearing wet jeans and her mother's locket had run through a storm in the dead of night to save her own life. She'd spent 2 years secretly preparing for escape because some deep instinct knew she was in danger. She'd listened to her husband plot her destruction, and chosen survival over submission. This Nora wanted justice. The gala, she said slowly, the plan forming as she spoke. He wants to use it to destroy me publicly. What if we used it to destroy him instead? Wyatt's grim smile turned into something sharper, something that reminded her they came from the same blood, the same stubborn refusal to go down without a fight. Tell me what you need. For the next 3 days, Nora hid in the cabin near Sisters deep in the high desert of Central Oregon, where ponderosa pines stretched toward impossibly blue skies. The landscape was so different from the rainforest she'd left behind that it felt like stepping onto another planet. Dry air instead of constant moisture. Sunlight that cut sharp and clean instead of filtering soft through endless mist. The cabin was small, one room with a wood stove, a narrow bed, and windows that looked out on nothing but forest. No neighbors, no pack, no one watching her every move, judging her every failure. For the first time in 5 years, Nora could breathe without feeling an invisible hand pressing down on her chest. She chopped her own wood, learning the rhythm of the axe, the satisfaction of seeing logs split clean. She ate canned soup heated over the wood stove. She slept 14 hours the first night, her body finally releasing years of accumulated exhaustion. When she woke, she half expected to find herself back in the master bedroom at the Blackwood estate, the whole escape having been just a desperate dream. But the cabin was real, the silence was real. The absence of Declan's alpha aura pressing against her senses was so real it made her dizzy with relief. Her wolf, usually kept carefully controlled and quiet, stretched out inside her mind for the first time in years. Without Declan's dominant presence constantly asserting itself, without the weight of pack hierarchy crushing down, she could feel her own strength again. Not the borrowed power of being a Luna, her own. On the second day, she called Wyatt on the landline. I found someone, he said without preamble. Goes by Ghost online, used to be part of Declan's pack until he got banished 3 years ago for questioning an elder's decision. He's been living in Seattle, working as a freelance security consultant, which is a nice way of saying he breaks into systems for people who can pay. Can we trust him? He hates Declan more than we do. When I told him what we needed, he laughed for a full minute. Then he said he'd do it for free, but I'm paying him $5,000 anyway, because good work deserves good pay. Nora thought of the prepaid cards hidden in her duffel. $5,000 was half her escape fund, but this wasn't about money anymore. This was about making sure that when Declan tried to destroy her, he destroyed himself instead. What does he need from us? Already got it. I sent him the email evidence, the prescription, records, everything. He's putting together a presentation that'll make Declan's legal team look like amateurs. Wyatt paused. Ghost wants you to know something, Nora. What Declan did to you, the medical manipulation, that's not just pack law violation, that's criminal. Real human world criminal. Reproductive coercion, medical fraud. If you wanted to press charges after this is over, you'd have a case. Nora leaned against the cabin's rough log wall, the phone pressed to her ear. Press charges. Send Declan to human prison, not just pack justice. The idea was tempting, a fantasy of complete destruction. But she knew how these things worked. Declan had lawyers who could tie up cases for years. He had money to make problems disappear. And explaining shifter dynamics to a human court would expose their entire world. One thing at a time, she said. Let's make it through Friday first. Ghost will have everything ready. He's going to hack the gala's audiovisual system. All those fancy screens they use for the charity auction, at midnight, instead of showing donor names, they're going to show something else. What if Declan's people shut it down? Ghost is very good at what he does. Once it starts, it won't stop until he wants it to. And Nora, Wyatt's voice softened, you don't have to watch. You could just let this happen, stay safe, and Sisters never look back. But she knew she would watch. Needed to watch. This was her life being reclaimed, her narrative being rewritten. She wasn't going to miss it. Friday arrived with clear skies and temperatures that dropped close to freezing once the sun set. Nora drove the Tahoe into the small town of Sisters just after dark, parking outside the public library to steal their Wi-Fi. She sat in the cold cab with Wyatt's laptop balanced on her knees, watching her breath mist in the air. The Autumn Equinox Gala was being live-streamed by a Seattle news affiliate. Declan had always insisted on press coverage for the charity events, loved the positive publicity, the photos of him in a tuxedo writing large checks to worthy causes. Tonight, that vanity would be his undoing. The stream started at 8. Nora watched the ballroom fill with people she recognized. PAC members in formal wear, their human facades perfect and polished. Regional council members from neighboring territories. Human donors who had no idea they were mingling with shifters. The press cameras flashing, capturing everything. The ballroom looked magnificent. draped in autumn colors burnt orange and deep gold, with crystal chandeliers catching the light like captured stars. The screens mounted on either side of the stage displayed the event logo and scrolling donor names. Everything elegant, everything controlled. Declan stood near the stage in a tailored black tuxedo, and even through the grainy live stream, Nora could see he was wound tight. His smile was sharp enough to cut. His movements were precise, controlled, but there was something brittle underneath. He kept scanning the crowd like he was looking for someone. Looking for her. Sable Wren stood by his side in a crimson gown that hugged curves Nora now understood were enhanced by pregnancy. The dress was cut to showcase rather than hide her changing figure, a deliberate statement. She touched Declan's arm, frequently leaned in to whisper in his ear, played the role of devoted companion. The role that should have been Nora's. Elder Rowan moved through the crowd like a shark, his silver hair gleaming under the chandeliers, accepting respectful nods from younger pack members. Beta Liam stood near the bar, his expression carefully neutral, but Nora noticed he wasn't drinking, wasn't socializing, just watching. The charity auction proceeded smoothly. A week at a villa in Tuscany, a vintage wine collection, a private concert from a Seattle symphony. Wealthy people bidding against each other for the thrill of it, for the tax deduction, for the social status. The screens displayed each item with professional photographs, the bids climbing higher. Nora's hands were ice cold despite the laptop's heat. She checked the time on the dashboard clock. 11:45. 15 minutes until midnight. 15 minutes until Declan planned to invoke the ancient rite of severance to present her medical records to publicly declare her barren and useless. Except she wasn't there to be destroyed. At 11:55, Declan took the stage. The crowd quieted, champagne glasses held ready for the traditional midnight toast. He looked out over the ballroom with the confidence of a man who controlled everything he could see. The press cameras focused on him, the live stream zooming in on his face. "Honored guest," Declan began, his voice booming through the speakers with practiced authority. "Tonight we celebrate the prosperity of the Blackwood legacy and our commitment to this community. But leadership requires difficult choices, transparency, hard truths." He paused, letting the words settle. Nora could see Elder Rowan nodding right on cue. This was the moment they'd planned. The moment Declan would reveal Luna's failure would invoke pack law, would justify his decision to replace her. "I must make an announcement about our Luna." Declan continued, his tone shifting to something resembling regret perfectly calibrated for the cameras. "My wife Nora has been struggling with a medical condition that affects our pack's future. I've tried to be patient to give her time, but the reality is, the screens behind him flickered." Declan paused, glancing back. The event coordinator near the tech booth looked confused, tapping frantically at a tablet. The screens went black for 3 seconds. Then they blazed to life with something new. Audio first. Declan's own voice, crystal clear, filling the ballroom through the sound system. "I know, Rowan. The arrangements have already been made. Nora has served her purpose in maintaining diplomatic ties, but her usefulness has expired." The ballroom erupted in confused murmurs. Declan's face drained of color. He turned fully toward the screens, his hand raised as if he could physically stop what was happening. Elder Rowan's voice came next. "A barren Luna is a curse on the soil. We need a strong female to solidify your reign." Then Sable's voice, sweet and vicious. "She's going to make a scene, Declan. You know how emotional she gets." And Declan again, his tone softening in a way it never had for his wife. "She won't have the chance to make a scene, Sable. The law allows an alpha to sever a mate who cannot fulfill her biological duty. It will be public, legally binding, and undeniable. And then I announce my new Luna, the one who is already carrying my heir." The screen shifted, displaying email threads, the correspondence with Dr. Chen, the falsified medical records, the prescription orders for contraceptives disguised as vitamins. Each damning piece of evidence presented in clean, clear formatting that even the human guest could understand. The ballroom descended into absolute chaos. The human press scrambled forward, cameras flashing like strobe lights, microphones thrust toward the stage. They smelled blood in the water. A billionaire CEO caught in a conspiracy to medically manipulate his wife. This was a scandal that would dominate news cycles for weeks. The shifter elders stood up from their table, faces twisted with outrage. Not because Declan wanted to replace his Luna Pack law allowed that, but because he'd done it through deception, through medical fraud, through dishonoring the bond itself. He'd made their entire pack look weak, made them complicit in his lies. Investors and donors headed for the exits, not wanting their names associated with whatever this was turning into. Society wives clutched their pearls and whispered behind manicured hands. The carefully constructed image of the Blackwood family of Declan as a respected leader was crumbling in real time. On the screen, more evidence appeared. Financial records showing the frozen trust accounts. Text messages between Declan and Sable dating back 8 months, casual and intimate in a way that made their affair undeniable. A timeline that Ghost had constructed showing how long Declan had been planning this, how calculated every move had been. Declan stood frozen on the stage, the microphone still in his hand, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound coming out. He looked small suddenly despite his height, despite the expensive tuxedo. He looked like exactly what he was, a man whose machinations had just been exposed under the brightest possible light. Sable screamed a high piercing sound that cut through the noise. She covered her face with her hands and fled toward the side exit, her crimson dress a slash of color against the autumn decorations. People parted for her, recoiling like she was contagious. Elder Rowan tried to reach the tech booth, probably to shut down the screens manually, but Beta Liam stepped into his path. The two men stared at each other, and something passed between them, some wordless exchange. Liam didn't move. Rowan couldn't get past without causing a physical confrontation in front of the press. The screens continued cycling through evidence. A recorded phone call between Declan and Elder Rowan discussing the medical procedure they'd prepared as backup if Nora refused to go quietly. Photos of Sable entering the Blackwood estate at odd hours over the past 6 months. Financial transfers that suggested Declan had been paying the Wren family to secure their daughter's cooperation. Ghost had been thorough, devastatingly thorough. Nora sat in the cold Tahoe watching through the laptop screen. She'd expected vindication, maybe satisfaction, the rush of seeing justice served. Instead, she felt like she'd survived a car crash and was now standing beside the wreckage, too numb to process what had just happened. 5 years of her life had been built on lies. 5 years of trying to be good enough to be worthy to earn love from a man who'd only ever seen her as a temporary convenience. And now that truth was playing out on screens for hundreds of people to witness her private pain made public spectacle. She closed the laptop. She'd seen enough. The drive back to Sisters was silent except for the Tahoe's rattling engine. Nora's hands were steady on the wheel, now her breathing even. She'd done what she needed to do. Declan's plan to destroy her had become his own destruction. Now she just needed to disappear to build a life somewhere he could never reach. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. 5 weeks passed. Nora settled into a routine in Sisters. She found work at a small bookstore in town, a place called Sterling Pages, run by an older woman named Josephine who asked no questions about where Nora had come from or why she paid for everything in cash. Jo was in her late 60s with silver hair she wore in a long braid and eyes that had seen enough of life to recognize someone running from it. The work was simple, peaceful. Shelving books, helping customers, managing the register. Nora had always loved reading, but at the Blackwood estate, even that pleasure had become fraught. Declan would comment on her choices, suggest different books, ones more appropriate for Aluna. She'd stopped reading anything that might displease him. Now she read voraciously. Mysteries and romances, and books about women who survived impossible things. She lived in a small apartment above the bookstore that Jo rented to her for cheap, claiming she was doing Nora a favor by having someone on site for security. The shifter forums had exploded after the gala. Wyatt sent her updates every few days, though she'd asked him to stop. She didn't want to know, but he sent them anyway, and she read them anyway, unable to fully let go. Declan had become a pariah. The human press had latched onto the story of medical manipulation and potential fraud. His board of directors at Cascade Timber had forced him to take a leave of absence while they investigated. Several major investors had pulled out, citing ethical concerns. The company's stock had dropped 40% in 2 weeks. But the shifter world's judgment was far harsher. The regional pack council had convened an emergency session. Multiple neighboring alphas had issued formal statements denouncing Declan's actions. The bond between an alpha and Luna was considered sacred, and what he'd done planning to sever it through deception and medical manipulation was seen as a profound violation of pack law. The Thornridge pack itself was fracturing. Without Nora physically present, but with the bond still technically intact, the pack magic was bleeding out. Members reported feeling weaker, more disconnected. Minor disputes were escalating into major conflicts. The hierarchies that Declan had maintained through sheer dominance were breaking down. And then there was Sable. She'd fled back to her father's territory, but the Wren pack had refused to take her in. The scandal had destroyed her reputation, made her damaged goods in the eyes of traditional packs. She was alone, pregnant, and outcast. Nora tried to feel sorry for her, tried to summon compassion for another woman caught in the machinery of pack politics. But every time she thought about Sable crying in the guest bathroom, playing the victim, while carrying Declan's child while planning to take Nora's place, the compassion curdled into something harder. It was the nausea that finally forced Nora to acknowledge something was wrong. 5 weeks of persistent queasiness that she'd been blaming on stress, on the altitude change, on the unfamiliar food. But when she woke up on a Tuesday morning and barely made it to the bathroom before vomiting, she couldn't ignore it anymore. The symptoms were subtle but unmistakable once she let herself see them. The exhaustion that went deeper than normal tiredness. The way smells had become overwhelming, coffee making her gag when she used to drink 3 cups a day. The tenderness in her breasts. The emotional volatility that had her crying over a customer's offhand kindness. She tried to convince herself it was impossible. 3 years of trying, 18 failed attempts. Multiple specialists telling her the treatments weren't working. The medical records Declan had compiled declaring her essentially infertile. But those records were lies. The treatments had been sabotaged, and she hadn't been on birth control for 5 weeks now, not since she'd fled. Her body, free from Declan's control, free from the medications he'd been secretly giving her, might finally be doing what it was designed to do. Nora bought a pregnancy test from the drugstore 2 towns over, paying cash, wearing sunglasses even though it was overcast. She felt like a teenager, terrified and hopeful in equal measure. She took the test in the bathroom of her apartment, sitting on the closed toilet lid, while the timer on her phone counted down 3 minutes that felt like 3 hours. 2 lines, unmistakable, positive. She stared at the test until the lines started to blur her vision, swimming with tears she didn't know were falling. Pregnant, after everything. After years of failure that had poisoned her marriage. After running for her life. After watching her world collapse on live stream. She was carrying Declan's child. The realization brought a tidal wave of conflicting emotions. Joy, because despite everything she'd wanted this. Fear, because Declan would use this, would try to claim rights, would see it as ammunition. Protectiveness so fierce it took her breath away, because this child was hers, and she would burn the world down before she let Declan anywhere near them. Nora called Dr. Iris Caldwell, her mother's old friend, the one person she knew she could trust with this. Iris had moved to Bend 2 years ago, was practicing obstetrics at a small clinic there. When Nora explained the situation in halting words over the phone, Iris simply said, "Come see me tomorrow. We'll figure this out together." The drive to Bend took 2 hours through high desert landscape that slowly gave way to the foothills of the Cascade Mountains. Dr. Caldwell's clinic was in a modest building near the old downtown, the kind of place that took walk-ins and didn't ask too many questions. Iris was in her late 50s with kind eyes and capable hands and the air of someone who'd seen every possible complication human biology could throw at medicine. She hugged Nora when she arrived, the first real embrace Nora had felt since leaving Wyatt at the diner. The ultrasound was both terrifying and miraculous. The cold gel on Nora's stomach, the wand pressing against her abdomen, the screen showing grainy black and white images that slowly resolved into something recognizable. "There," Iris said, pointing to a tiny flickering pulse. 8 weeks along. Strong heartbeat. 8 weeks. Nora counted backward in her head. That meant conception happened right around the time she fled. Maybe that last night at the estate when Declan had been in his study plotting her destruction while she slept alone in their bed. Or maybe in the days just before one of those perfunctory attempts at intimacy that had become mechanical and joyless. "I don't understand," Nora whispered, still staring at the fluttering pulse on the screen. 3 years of trying. How is this possible now? Iris turned off the ultrasound machine and helped Nora sit up, handing her paper towels to wipe away the gel. Then she pulled up a chair and sat down, her expression serious. "Nora, have you heard of alpha aura suppression?" And no. It's not well documented in medical literature because most of the research is kept within pack networks. But essentially, a dominant alpha's aura can affect the biology of their mate, especially if the alpha is exerting constant control. Iris pulled out a tablet showing Nora charts and studies. When an alpha is stressed, threatened, or maintaining rigid dominance, their aura can suppress their mate's fertility. It's a biological safeguard preventing conception during times of instability. Nora thought about the last 2 years with Declan, the constant tension, his increasing dominance as he felt his control slipping. The way his alpha presence had pressed against her senses like a physical weight, making it hard to think, to feel, to be anything except what he wanted her to be. "You're saying Declan's aura was preventing me from getting pregnant. Combined with the birth control he was secretly giving you, yes. Your body was under siege, Nora. It shut down non-essential functions to survive. Reproduction is the first thing to go when a wolf feels unsafe." Iris touched Nora's hand gently. But the moment you left his territory, the moment you removed yourself from his constant influence, your body recognized safety, and it started working the way it was meant to. The irony was devastating. Declan had manipulated her medically to prevent pregnancy, had built an entire case around her supposed infertility. But his own nature, his own controlling dominance, had been contributing to the problem all along. If he'd just trusted her, loved her, given her space to breathe, she might have conceived years ago. Does he have any legal claim to the child? Nora asked the question that had been consuming her since she saw the positive test. That depends. You're still legally married. The binding hasn't been formally severed. In PAC law, that gives him rights. Iris pulled up another document on her tablet. But PAC law isn't the only law. In Oregon human courts, if you can prove he's a danger to you or the child, you can get protective orders, especially given the medical manipulation, the fraud, the documented evidence of his intent to harm you. He'll come for us, Nora said, the certainty settling in her bones. When he finds out I'm pregnant with his heir, he'll do anything to get us back. Then we make sure he doesn't find out until you're ready. Iris stood up, her expression fierce despite her gentle demeanor. This is your body, your child, your choice. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. But Nora, you need to know something. You're not the first woman I've helped who was running from a dangerous mate. There's a network. Rejected Lunas, escaped mates, women who chose freedom over PAC law. We help each other. You're not alone in this. The words broke something open in Nora's chest. For weeks, she'd been operating on pure survival instinct, not letting herself think about the future beyond the next day. But hearing that there were other women, that she wasn't uniquely broken or uniquely unlucky, that there was a network of survivors who understood it, made her feel less like a failure and more like a warrior. What do I do now? She asked. Now you take care of yourself and that baby. You eat well, you rest, you let yourself heal from what he did to you. And when you're strong enough, we figure out the next steps. Iris handed Nora a bottle of prenatal vitamins, one day at a time. Nora drove back to Sisters with the ultrasound photo tucked into her jacket pocket, right next to her mother's locket. 8 weeks and 2 days, a tiny flutter of heartbeat that was entirely dependent on her to survive. The weight of responsibility should have been crushing, but instead it felt like purpose. She'd spent 5 years trying to be what Declan wanted, trying to produce an heir to secure his legacy. And now that she'd escaped, now that she was free, her body had finally done what it had been unable to do under his control. This child wasn't his. Not really. This child was hers. Born from freedom, not captivity. Conceived in the space between one life and another. And she would protect them with everything she had. But Declan, it turned out, was not a man who accepted loss quietly. The first sign came 2 days after her appointment with Dr. Caldwell. Nora was closing up the bookstore, counting the register, while Joe reorganized the fiction section when her burner phone rang. Only 3 people had the number: Wyatt, Drive, Caldwell, and Joe in case of emergencies. The caller ID showed Wyatt. He knows you're in Oregon, her brother said without preamble. I don't know how, but someone spotted the Tahoe and Sisters. Posted about it on a shifter forum. Declan's people are monitoring everything. Nora's hand tightened on the phone. How long do I have? Hard to say. Could be days, could be hours if he decides to come himself. Wyatt's voice was tight with worry. Do you want me to come get you? We could move you somewhere else. She thought about running again, packing up the small life she'd started to build, here disappearing into another town, another identity. She could do it. She had the skills now, the instinct for survival. But she was tired of running, and she had someone else to think about now. No, she said. I'm staying, but Wyatt, if he comes, if he tries anything, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Make sure this baby is safe. Whatever happens to me, make sure they're safe. Nora, don't talk like that. Promise me. A long pause. Then quietly, I promise. She hung up and turned to find Joe watching her, concern etched in the older woman's weathered face. Trouble? Joe asked. My husband is looking for me. Ex-husband, I hope. Working on it. Nora tried to smile but couldn't quite manage it. Joe, if a man shows up here asking about me, a tall man, well-dressed, commanding presence, don't tell him anything. Please. Joe came around the counter, standing close enough that Nora could smell her lavender perfume. Honey, I've been running this bookstore for 30 years. I've seen plenty of women come through those doors running from men who thought they owned them. Your secrets are safe with me. And if your husband shows up, she patted the baseball bat she kept behind the register, I've got ways of making people feel unwelcome. Despite everything, Nora laughed. It felt good, that small release of tension. She went upstairs to her apartment and packed a go bag, just in case. Closed the prepaid cards. She had left her mother's locket, the ultrasound photo. She put it by the door where she could grab it quickly if needed. Then she sat on the small couch by the window looking out at the quiet street below the mountains dark against the evening sky and waited to see if her past would catch up with her. It took 3 days. 3 days of looking over her shoulder, of jumping at every customer who walked into the bookstore, of sleeping in her clothes so she'd be ready to run. Declan came on a Sunday afternoon when the store was slow. Nora was helping a customer find a book on local hiking trails when the bell over the door chimed. She looked up automatically, the customer service smile already forming on her face. It died when she saw who stood in the doorway. He looked terrible. Declan had always been impeccably groomed, his appearance a weapon he wielded with precision. But the man standing in her bookstore had lost at least 20 pounds, the expensive suit hanging loose on his frame. His hair was unkempt, growing past the neat trim he'd always maintained. Dark circles carved hollows under his eyes, and his skin had a grayish cast that spoke of too little sleep and too much stress. But it was his scent that shocked her most. Every wolf carried a scent that reflected their emotional state, usually masked carefully in public. Declan's had always been cedar and control, sharp and clean. Now he reeked of desperation, the acrid smell of a wolf who'd lost his territory and couldn't find his way back. His eyes locked onto her face. For a moment, neither of them moved. The customer cleared her throat awkwardly, breaking the tableau. Nora mechanically finished, helping her, pointed her toward the hiking section, her hands somehow steady despite the panic flooding her system. Declan waited until the customer wandered away before he approached the counter. He moved slowly, carefully, like someone approaching a spooked animal. His hands were open, visible, non-threatening. "Nora," he said, and his voice cracked on her name. She said nothing, just stood behind the register, her fingers resting on the panic button Joe had installed that would alert the local sheriff if pressed. "Please," Declan continued, each word seeming to cost him. "I just want to talk. 5 minutes. That's all I ask. You don't get to ask me for anything. I know I don't deserve it. But Nora, the pack is dying. The business is collapsing. I've lost everything." His hands gripped the edge of the counter. "I was wrong. God, I was so wrong. Sable lied to me. About the pregnancy, about everything. She was working with Beta Liam behind my back. They'd been having an affair for over a year." Nora's eyebrows rose slightly. She hadn't known about Liam's involvement, but it didn't surprise her. Wolves were political creatures, always positioning for advantage. "Liam thought if I rejected you, if I took Sable as Luna, he could manipulate both of us. He'd be the power behind the throne." Declan laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. "I banished them both when I found out. Burned every bridge with the Wren pack. And now I have nothing. No Luna, no heir, no pack unity. The regional council is talking about forcing me to step down." He looked up at her, and there were tears on his face, actual tears running down his cheeks into his unkempt beard. "But none of that matters. What matters is I lost you. I threw away the best thing in my life because I was arrogant and stupid, and I listened to tradition instead of my heart." Nora felt nothing. She'd expected anger, maybe satisfaction at seeing him broken. Instead, there was just emptiness where her feelings for him used to live. "Why are you here, Declan?" "To apologize, to beg forgiveness, to ask you to come back." He reached into his jacket, and Nora's hand moved to the panic button, but he just pulled out papers. "I've had my lawyers draw up new agreements. Full control of your trust accounts. Equal authority in pack decisions. A guarantee that you'll never be threatened with severance again, regardless of heirs. Whatever you want, Nora, name it, and it's yours. I want you to leave. Please." He came around the counter, and she stepped back, maintaining distance. "Just listen. The moon goddess brought us together for a reason. What we had was real. I know I damaged it, but we can rebuild. We can try again. Start fresh." "There is no trying again, Declan. You poisoned me. For 18 months, you put birth control in my vitamins and let me think my body was broken. Do you understand what that did to me? I know, and I hate myself for it. But Nora, we could still have children. Real ones without manipulation. The doctor said there's no medical reason we can't conceive naturally if we just—" He stopped. His nostrils flared. His entire body went rigid. He was scenting her. Nora watched his face change as he processed what his wolf senses were telling him. Watched the confusion shift to disbelief, then to desperate hope. His eyes dropped to her stomach. She wasn't showing yet. 8 weeks was too early, but he knew. Somehow he knew. "You're pregnant," he whispered. She said nothing, didn't confirm or deny, just stood there, one hand unconsciously moving to her abdomen in a protective gesture. Declan's knees hit the floor. The sound echoed through the quiet bookstore. He crawled forward, his hands reaching towards her, his face transformed by a terrible aching hope. "A pup," he breathed. "Nora, you're carrying a pup, my pup. Our pup." He looked up at her, tears streaming freely now. "The moon goddess gave us a second chance. Don't you see this is fate? This is proof that we're meant to be together. Get up, Declan. You can have everything. I'll give you everything. The estate, the company, the pack. You can be the alpha if you want, I don't care. Just please, please come back. Let me be a father. Let me make this right." He reached for her stomach and Nora stepped back sharply, her voice cutting like ice. "Don't touch me. It's my child too." "No," she said, and the word rang with finality. "This child is mine. You forfeited any right to us the night you sat in your study with a glass of bourbon and plotted how to destroy me. Nora, please. You don't understand, do you?" She looked down at him, this man who'd once seemed so powerful, now broken on the floor of a bookstore in a town he'd never heard of until 3 days ago. "You wanted me gone. You wanted to replace me. You got your wish. I'm gone. I was wrong. I'll spend the rest of my life proving I was wrong." The answer is no. She moved toward the door, opening it, cold air rushing in. "Leave Declan. Don't come back. Don't call. Don't send lawyers or flowers or gifts. Stay away from me and stay away from my child. Our child. Mine." She repeated the word absolute. "You made your choice. Now live with it." He pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. For a moment, she thought he might try to force the issue, might try to use his alpha aura to command her compliance, the way he'd done so many times before. But she'd been free of his influence for weeks now. Her wolf was strong again, sovereign in her own mind. When he tried to push to assert dominance, she pushed back with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. Declan stumbled, shock registering on his face. She'd never resisted him before. Never been able to. "Leave," she said again, "or I'll call the sheriff and show him the restraining order Dr. Caldwell helped me file." He left, walked out of the bookstore into the gray afternoon, his shoulders hunched, moving like a man 3 times his age. She watched him get into a black SUV parked down the street, watched it drive away. Only when it was completely out of sight did she let herself shake. Only then did she lock the door, flip the sign to closed, and sink down behind the counter with her arms wrapped around her middle. "It's okay," she whispered to the tiny life inside her. "We're okay, he's gone." But she knew it wasn't over. Declan had found her once. He would try again. Men like him didn't accept no, didn't accept loss. And now that he knew about the baby, knew his heir existed, he would be relentless. Nora pulled out her burner phone and called Wyatt. "He found me," she said, "and he knows about the baby." Her brother's curse was loud and creative. "I'm coming to get you." "No, not yet." And she pressed her back against the counter, thinking, "But Wyatt, I need you to do something for me. I need you to find a lawyer, a good one, someone who specializes in domestic cases and isn't afraid to go up against money and power." "What are you planning?" "I'm going to end this," she said, "on my terms, not his." The months that followed were a study in quiet rebellion. Nora built a life in Bend that had nothing to do with PACs or politics or the weight of other people's expectations. She moved from sisters after Declan's visit, not running this time, but relocating strategically. Joe helped her find a small house on the outskirts of town, a 1-bedroom cottage with a yard backing onto national forest land. "You'll need the space," Joe had said, eyeing Nora's barely there bump, "for the baby and for yourself." The bookstore job came with her. Joe opened a second location in Bend and put Nora in charge of it, trusting her with keys and accounts and decisions. It was the first time in 5 years anyone had trusted Nora with real responsibility, had treated her like a competent adult rather than a decorative figurehead. Dr. Iris Caldwell became more than just her obstetrician. She became a friend, stopping by the bookstore during lunch breaks to check on Nora, inviting her to quiet dinners where they talked about everything except Declan. Iris introduced her to other women in the network, rejected Lunas, and escaped mates who'd built lives out of the wreckage of pack politics. There was Claudia, who ran a pottery studio and hadn't spoken to her former pack in 12 years. There was Renee, a nurse who'd fled with her 3 children when her alpha mate's violence escalated beyond what she could survive. There was young Simone, barely 22, who'd been promised to an alpha twice her age and chose homelessness over that fate. They met once a month at Iris's house, these women who'd chosen freedom over obligation. They didn't talk about their traumas like wounds to be displayed. Instead, they shared practical advice. How to shield against alpha commands, how to navigate human legal systems, how to build credit under a new identity, how to protect children from pack politics. Nora learned she wasn't special in her suffering. She was ordinary, one of dozens, probably hundreds of women who'd been crushed under the weight of tradition and had to claw their way to air. The knowledge was both devastating and liberating. By her fourth month of pregnancy, Nora had gained weight in a way that felt healthy rather than monitored. Her body was her own again, responding to her needs rather than Declan's control. The baby moved inside her small flutters that grew stronger each week, and every kick felt like a tiny rebellion. Declan tried to reach her through lawyers, flowers, and money, official letters demanding she return, citing his rights as father. Massive bouquets of white roses delivered weekly, all donated to the hospital. A check for $50,000 torn into pieces and mailed back with a single word no. Then came the most dangerous attempt. For 2 weeks, Declan stood outside the bookstore every morning when Nora arrived and every evening when she left. He didn't speak, didn't approach, just stood there, a silent reminder that he could find her whenever he wanted. Nora's lawyer, Patricia Vance, made calls. The regional pack council, already under pressure after the gala scandal, issued a formal summons. Declan was being called to Portland to answer for violations of pack law, and Nora was invited to testify. She didn't want to go. The thought of facing Declan in an official capacity, of recounting her humiliation in front of elders and council members, made her physically ill. She was 7 months pregnant, her energy limited, her belly round and obvious. But Patricia was adamant. This isn't just about you anymore. If they censure him, if they strip his authority, it sets precedent. It protects future Lunas. And Beta Liam called her directly. I know I don't deserve your time. I know what I did helping Declan was unforgivable. But I'm trying to make it right. The pack needs this. They need to see that what he did to you won't be tolerated. Will you come? Nora sat in her cottage, one hand on her swollen belly, feeling the baby roll inside her. She thought about her mother's journal, about Claudia and Renee and Simone, about all the women who'd never gotten justice. I'll come, she said, but I'm doing it remotely, video call only. The trial was scheduled for a Tuesday in late April. Nora set up the laptop in the bookstore's back office. Joe closed the store, standing guard. Wyatt drove down from Portland, sitting just off camera where Nora could see him. Dr. Iris was present in the Portland hearing room. The video call connected at 9 sharp. Nora's screen filled with a conference room, chairs arranged in a semicircle facing a central table where Declan sat alone. He looked better than at the bookstore, suit pressed, hair trimmed, but the weight loss and exhaustion were still visible. 7 council members represented the regional territories. Elder Rowan was conspicuously absent, having resigned after his role became public. The new council head was Sage Thornton Alpha of a Eugene pack known for progressive policies. Sage called the session to order. We're here to address formal complaints against Declan Blackwood, former Alpha of Thornridge Pack, regarding his treatment of his bonded mate, Nora Hastings. Mrs. Hastings has agreed to provide testimony via video conference due to her advanced pregnancy. The camera shifted to show Nora's image on a large screen. Declan's head snapped up. He registered her pregnant silhouette. His face crumpled before he managed to school it neutral. The questioning began with facts. When did she first suspect? When did she discover the manipulation? How long had she taken the disguised birth control? Patricia had prepared her well. Nora answered clearly, voice steady. Then Sage asked what mattered. Mrs. Hastings, can you describe the emotional and psychological impact of discovering that your mate had been deliberately preventing conception while allowing you to believe you were infertile? Nora took a breath. For 3 years, I believed my body was broken. Every negative pregnancy test felt like a personal failure. I blamed myself. I thought I was letting down the pack, letting down Declan, failing at the one thing a Luna is supposed to do. She paused. I went through invasive medical procedures, hormone treatments that made me sick, consultations with specialists who looked at me with pity. And the whole time my husband was ensuring I would fail. He was poisoning me while pretending to support me. When you learned the truth, how did you respond? I ran, because I understood that if he could do that, if he could manipulate my body and my medical care, while looking me in the eye and telling me he loved me, then I wasn't safe. I would never be safe with him. Declan made a sound quickly stifled. Sage shot him a warning look. And yet you're currently pregnant. Can you explain how that's possible after years of failed conception? Dr. Iris stepped forward, providing medical testimony about alpha aura suppression, how Declan's dominance combined with contraceptives had created an environment where Nora's body couldn't function. She showed charts, studies, documentation. Mrs. Hastings conceived approximately 3 weeks after leaving her mate's territory. The correlation is clear. Her body needed to be free of his influence to function naturally. The council members murmured. Nora could see the impact registering, the implications sinking in. Then Declan's turn. He stood slowly. Even through the video, Nora could feel him trying to project authority. I don't deny what I did. The evidence is clear. I manipulated my mate's medical care. I conspired to publicly reject her. I violated her trust in the worst possible way. But I need this council to understand that I acted out of desperation, not malice. Explain, Sage said, tone neutral. The pack was pressuring me, Elder Rowan especially. Everyday questions about an heir, comparisons to other alphas, whispers that I was weak, that my leadership was compromised because I couldn't produce a pup. Declan's hands gripped the table. I felt trapped. The traditional laws said 3 years. I thought if I could just buy more time, eventually it would work out. So you decided to control your mate's body instead of challenging the elders. Yes, and it was wrong. I see that now. But I was trying to protect her in my own twisted way. If I could prevent pregnancy and blame medical incompatibility, she wouldn't have to face rejection immediately. Nora couldn't stay silent. You weren't protecting me. You were protecting yourself, your position, your pride. Declan turned toward the camera. You're right, I was protecting myself. But Nora, I'm asking for a chance to make it right. Our child deserves a father. The pack needs stability. We could try again. No, Nora said the word absolute. I'm not here to reconcile. I'm here to make sure you can't do this to anyone else. Sage nodded approvingly. Mrs. Hastings, what outcome are you seeking? Nora had thought about this for weeks. I want the bond formally severed. I want full legal and physical custody of my child with no visitation rights for Declan. I want pack laws reformed so no alpha can reject a mate based on fertility alone, and no alpha can make medical decisions for their mate without explicit consent. And I want Declan stripped of his alpha title, not as punishment, but as protection. He's proven he can't be trusted with that kind of power. The room erupted, council members arguing, voices raised. Declan standing shouting, Sage hammering a gavel. Through it all, Nora sat calm, one hand on her belly. She'd said what needed saying. The rest was up to them. The council debated 4 hours. Nora muted the feed, tried to work shelved books with Wyatt, drank Joe's tea, pretended her future wasn't being decided 200 miles away. When Sage called them back, her face was grave. The council has reached a decision. Declan Blackwood, you are hereby stripped of your alpha title, effective immediately. Beta Liam will assume leadership of Thornridge Pack pending formal selection. The bond between you and Nora Hastings is formally severed as of this moment. Nora felt it snap. The psychic tether already frayed broke completely, like a rubber band releasing. A sudden absence of pressure she hadn't realized she still carried. Declan cried out, raw echoing. He collapsed into his chair, hands covering his face. Sage continued, relentless. Furthermore, we are implementing new pack laws effective across all regional territories. No alpha may make medical decisions for their mate without documented consent. No mate may be rejected solely on grounds of infertility. Any alpha found guilty of reproductive coercion will face immediate removal from authority. She looked directly at the camera at Nora. Mrs. Hastings, regarding custody pack law defers to human law. We recommend you work with your attorney to formalize arrangements through Oregon courts. However, this council formally recognizes your right to raise your child free from interference. It was over. Not everything Nora wanted. She'd still need to fight custody in human courts, but more than she'd dared hope. The bond was broken. The laws changed. Declan's power gone. Thank you, she said and meant it. The screen went dark. Wyatt pulled her into a careful hug. Joe appeared with tea and cookies, but Nora felt oddly empty, the victory hollow. She'd won. So why did it feel like loss? 2 weeks after the hearing, Declan showed up at the bookstore one final time. Nora saw him through the window as she closed up, sunsetting behind the Cascades painting, everything amber and gold. He looked different, the expensive suit gone, replaced by jeans and a simple jacket. More weight loss, face gone. But the biggest change was in his eyes. The arrogance gone. The alpha dominance that had always radiated from him extinguished. He was just a man now, broken and lost. Nora stood inside the locked door, hand on the deadbolt, debating whether to acknowledge him. She was 8 months pregnant, back aching, feet swollen. She didn't have energy for another confrontation. But he didn't try the door. He simply stood on the sidewalk. When she made eye contact through the glass, he spoke. She couldn't hear through the door, but she could read his lips. "I'm sorry." Not manipulation, not prelude to demands. Just those two words. Then he pulled something from his pocket, an envelope, placed it on the doorstep, waited with a small river stone, stood back up, looked at her one more time, and left. Nora waited until his car disappeared before opening the door and retrieving the envelope. Inside, a single piece of paper handwritten in Declan's precise script. "Nora, I know I have no right to write to you, no right to ask anything, but I need you to know that I understand now what I did. Not just the medical manipulation or the betrayal, but the deeper crime. I tried to make you into something that would serve my needs instead of loving you for who you were. The council was right to strip my title. I wasn't fit to lead. I wasn't even fit to be a husband. I'm leaving the Pacific Northwest. Liam will do better with the pack than I ever did. I'm going somewhere I can't hurt anyone else. Alaska, probably. Somewhere remote. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm not asking to be part of our child's life. You were right that they deserve better than me. I'm just asking that someday, if they ask about their father, you tell them the truth, all of it. The good parts I like to pretend existed, and the terrible parts I can't deny. Let them decide for themselves what to think of me. I've set up a trust fund in the baby's name. $2 million managed by a neutral third party, accessible when they turn 18. It's not child support. It's not a claim on them. It's just the only useful thing I can still do. Be happy, Nora. Be free. You deserve everything I couldn't give you, Declan." She read it 3 times, standing in the doorway as light faded. She should have felt triumph reading his admission of defeat, should have felt vindicated. Instead, she felt sad. Sad for the man he might have been if he'd chosen differently. Sad for the marriage that could have existed if he'd valued her as a person instead of a possession. Sad for their child, who would grow up with this complicated legacy. But underneath the sadness was something else, something quiet and strong. Relief. The story was ending. She could finally close this chapter and move forward. Nora folded the letter, placed it in her desk drawer. Someday, when her child was old enough to ask questions, she would show it to them, would tell them the truth just as Declan requested. But for now, she had a life to build. The baby came 3 weeks later on a bright May morning. Nora woke at 4 to contractions, mild at first, but steadily intensifying. She called Dr. Iris, who met her at the hospital. Wyatt drove down from Portland, arrived just before delivery. Joe brought flowers, stayed in the waiting room, pacing like a worried grandmother. The labor was long, difficult, 14 hours that blurred into a haze of pain and exhaustion, and the overwhelming biological imperative to push this new life into the world. But when they placed the baby on Nora's chest, a tiny girl with dark hair and eyes that would probably turn the same hazel as Nora's, everything else fell away. "She's perfect," Dr. Iris said, tears in her eyes. Nora couldn't speak, could only stare at this impossibly small person, this miracle. The baby's tiny hand curled around Nora's finger, gripping with surprising strength. "Have you chosen a name?" the nurse asked. Nora had thought about it for months, cycling through options. Family names, traditional names, names meaning strength or freedom or new beginnings. But in the end, she chose something simpler. "Ivy," she said. "Ivy Hastings, not Blackwood." Nora had legally reclaimed her maiden name during divorce proceedings, and she wanted her daughter to carry that name forward. A name untainted by pack politics, a name that belonged to them alone. "Ivy," Dr. Iris repeated softly. "It's perfect." The years that followed were quieter than anything Nora had known as Luna, but they were richer. She raised Ivy in the cottage outside Bend, watching her daughter grow from infant to toddler to a bright, curious child who loved books and trees and the stray cats wandering through their yard. Joe became Grandma Joe, teaching Ivy to love stories, reading to her in the bookstore during quiet afternoons. Wyatt visited monthly, bringing toys he'd built in his garage. Dr. Iris was Auntie Iris, monitoring Ivy's health and teaching Nora that raising a child alone didn't mean doing everything alone. The women's network expanded. Nora started hosting monthly meetings at her house, then those meetings grew into workshops. Financial literacy for women leaving pack situations. Legal rights and custody battles. Self-defense classes taught by Renee, who'd become a martial arts instructor. 3 years after Ivy's birth, Nora and Dr. Iris co-founded Luna's Light, a nonprofit dedicated to helping rejected Lunas and escaped mates. They rented a small office in downtown Bend, hired a part-time counselor, set up a 24-hour hotline. The work was slow at first, just a few women reaching out each month. But as word spread through underground networks, as women shared information in whispered conversations, encoded forum messages, the calls increased. Within 2 years, they'd helped 47 women escape dangerous situations, find housing, navigate legal systems, rebuild lives. Nora wrote a book. She didn't plan to, but one night when Ivy was 4, unable to sleep, Nora started writing down her story. Not for publication, just for herself. A way to process what happened to make sense of the journey from Luna to Survivor. But when she showed Patricia, her lawyer-turned-friend, Patricia insisted she publish it. There are thousands of women in pack situations who need to hear this, who need to know they're not alone. The memoir came out when Ivy was 5, published under Nora's real name with her real story. Howling, Free When Luna's Journey from Cage to Sky. The title came from something her mother had written in her journal, a line Nora had never understood until she lived it. The cage door was never locked. I just didn't know I was allowed to howl. The book became a quiet sensation in shifter communities, passed hand to hand, discussed in hushed tones. Some packs banned it, declaring Nora a traitor to tradition. Others used it as catalyst for reform, citing it in debates about modernizing pack laws. The human world noticed too. Reviewers who thought it an allegory about domestic abuse praised its emotional honesty. It sold modestly but steadily enough to provide financial stability, enough to expand Luna's light services. Declan never contacted her again. True to his word, he'd disappeared to Alaska. Wyatt heard occasional rumors, a lone wolf running with a small pack in the interior, keeping his head down, causing no trouble. The trust fund he'd set up for Ivy remained untouched, managed by a Seattle bank, waiting for the day she turned 18. Beta Liam, now Alpha. Liam sent a formal letter every year on Ivy's birthday. Brief updates on the pack, information about Ivy's paternal heritage, if she ever wanted to claim it, a standing invitation to visit if Nora ever felt safe. The letters were respectful, boundaried, asking for nothing. Nora filed them carefully in a folder marked for Ivy. Someday her daughter would have questions. Questions about her father, about pack culture, about why they lived the way they did. Nora would answer honestly, would share the letters and trust fund information and Declan's final note. But she would also make sure Ivy understood she had choices, that she could claim her shifter heritage or reject it, that she could join a pack or live independently, that her worth wasn't determined by bloodline or biological destiny. 5 years after the trial, on a crisp autumn evening, Nora sat in the bookstore after closing doing paperwork, while Ivy colored at a small table nearby. The girl was 8 now, all long limbs and wild dark hair, already showing signs of the wolf she would become when puberty hit. "Mama," Ivy said, not looking up from her drawing, "Sierra at school said alphas are the strongest wolves. Is that true?" Nora set down her pen, considering the question. She could give a simple answer the one pack culture taught. Yes, alphas are strongest. They lead because they're dominant. But she'd promised herself she would never lie to her daughter, never let tradition replace truth. "Come here, sweetheart." Ivy climbed into Nora's lap, getting too big for it, really, but Nora pulled her close anyway. She reached for her mother's locket, the silver pendant she wore every day, and opened it. Inside were 4 tiny photos, barely visible, but precious. Her grandmother, her mother, herself, and Ivy. "See these women?" Nora said softly. "Your great-grandmother was a Luna who got rejected for not having sons. Your grandmother was a Luna who got rejected for questioning pack decisions. I was a Luna who got rejected for not having children fast enough." Ivy looked up, hazel eyes serious. "But you had me." "I did, but only after I left. Only after I was free." Nora touched each photo gently. Real strength isn't about forcing others to obey. Real strength is choosing freedom even when it's terrifying. Your great-grandmother didn't have that choice. Your grandmother understood it but couldn't take it. I took it, and I'm teaching you. Teaching me what? That you get to decide what kind of wolf you want to be. That you get to decide if you want to be part of a pack or live independently. That your worth isn't determined by your rank or your ability to have children or anything except your own choices. Nora closed the locket, holding Ivy closer. The strongest wolves aren't the ones who dominate others. They're the ones who protect their own freedom and help others find theirs. Ivy was quiet, processing. Then she said, "When I grow up, I want to help lost Lunas, like you." Nora's throat tightened with emotion. Yeah, because everyone should get to howl. Outside, the sun set behind the Cascade Mountains, painting the sky orange and purple and gold. In the distance, Nora could hear the evening chorus of wildlife settling for the night. Birds calling to each other, wind through the pines, and somewhere far off the howl of wild wolves running free through the national forest. No alpha controlled them, no pack hierarchy constrained them. They ran because they chose to hunted, because they wanted to howled, because the moon was rising and their voices deserved to be heard. Nora had been a Luna. She'd been a wife. She'd been a vessel for someone else's expectations and a pawn in pack politics. Now she was just Nora, mother to Ivy, friend to women who needed sanctuary, author of her own story, free. And if that wasn't strength, nothing was. The bookstore door chimed, startling them both. Nora looked up to see Joe standing there, grocery bags in hand. "I brought dinner," the older woman announced. "Figured you two could use a proper meal instead of whatever frozen thing you were planning." Ivy scrambled down from Nora's lap, running to hug Grandma Joe, chattering about her day. Joe listened with the patience of someone who'd seen enough of life to know that small moments mattered most. Nora watched them, these two people who'd become her family by choice rather than blood. She thought about the women who would call the Luna's Light hotline this week, scared and desperate, and believing they had no options. She thought about the workshops they had planned, the resources they were building, the slow, steady work of changing minds and laws. She thought about Declan wherever he was carrying the weight of his choices. She didn't hate him anymore, didn't love him either. He was just a chapter in her story, important because of what it taught her, but not the defining narrative of her life. Her story wasn't a tragedy, it was a liberation, a testimony to the truth that cages are only as strong as our belief that we can't leave them. Nora had believed for 5 years that she was trapped, that she had no choice, that being a good Luna meant accepting whatever her alpha decided. Then one night she'd overheard the truth, and she'd chosen to run. That choice had cost her everything she thought defined her. Her marriage, her title, her place in pack society, her comfortable life of quiet luxury. But that choice had also given her everything that actually mattered. Her freedom, her daughter, her purpose, herself. "Mama, come on," Ivy called from the door. "Grandma Joe made your favorite." Nora stood up, locked the bookstore, and walked into the evening with her family. The moon was rising almost full, calling to the wolf that lived in her bones. But tonight she would stay human, would eat dinner with people who loved her, would read Ivy a bedtime story, would fall asleep in her own small house on her own terms. Tomorrow she would wake up free, and the day after that, and every day forward. Because true power didn't roar from a podium or enforce submission through dominance. It whispered in the quiet strength of walking away. It sang in the voices of women who chose to howl.